There's 10 common mistakes when you're purchasing home insurance. We're going to dive into those today and go over some of the benefits and disadvantages that you have when you're purchasing a new home. If it's new home, used home, whatever the case is, you need to have purchase insurance for that house. The first and probably one of the larger common mistakes that we see is understanding the value of your personal items, your possessions. We call it personal belongings. And what a lot of people typically think is, well, I don't have $100,000 worth of toys and shoes and couches and all of that type of stuff. But from our experience, when we've dealt with claims in the past, we've seen a lot more often that coverage has run out more than any other coverages on a policy. The most important piece you want to make sure that your agent replies to your account is that you have what's called full replacement cost. That essentially means that the value of your items today are worth whatever the new price is today, not necessarily the used or the garage sale, we'll call it, price. If you have a couch that's $800 and you paid $800 at a garage sale and it's a nice couch, that might cost you $3,000 to replace it. Who knows if you're going to be able to find that same style or material used in that scenario. The way that a homeowner's policy will happen if you have a claim is if you file a claim, they're going to have you itemize everything that you own. So it's very important to know, or at least take some sort of video or documentation of at least just kind of the gist of what you own. Because when you have to file that claim, you mentally have to know, okay, I had this in the house, I had this in the kitchen, I had this in here and there, and it's a lot of work. The positive is with everything being digital, you can look at your old credit receipts. It's almost like your taxes times 10. You have to itemize everything that you own in that event. If you don't have full replacement cost, what they're going to do is you have to determine how old that item was. If it's 7 years old, if it's 5 years old, there's depreciation that comes off of the replacement of that. Most of us are okay with losing half of the stuff we own because they're piled in a box somewhere and we probably don't remember them anyways. So if you don't necessarily have that, it's not a deal breaker, but it makes a huge difference to have that full replacement cost added. The second common mistake that new homeowners buy is not knowing what your coverages are. And I get it, like you're purchasing a home, there's a lot of excitement, you're ready to move in, you're picturing the furniture in there, you're living, you're building your life there, and now you're dealing with all of the finance type stuff. You're dealing with the mortgage brokers and maybe the loan falls through, and whatever the case is. We've worked with plenty of mortgage brokers to where not understanding what the value to the loan is can make a huge difference. That's where not just working with the right agent, it's working with the right mortgage broker as well. If you are looking for an insurance agent in Michigan, we'd love you to fill out a quote below. Otherwise, if you don't have the right finance mortgage broker, let us know. We have several that we work with that work in multiple states. So we can at least point you in the right direction with someone that will help you understand the things that we're going to talk about today. What a common mortgage broker is going to do is they're only cared about the loan. That's all they're focused on, is get this loan to process. That's their job. Get this to go through, get the lowest APR. That's great. Also, I need insurance for the loan. So if the loan goes default, then the insurance will pick up the thing. Or if the company goes bankrupt, or if the house has a fire and a total loss, the loan gets paid off. That's where you fall into a couple different types of insurance. You've got PMI. That's where your mortgage is protected there. We're more so talking about the loan to value. As long as we meet what your loan to value is on the loan, you're good. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily covered if there's a major occurrence. So you want to make sure that when you're purchasing the policy that you have the right coverages. I'm not going to go super in depth with that because I'll link a video here or at the end that we actually went through all of those coverages on a Home 101. It's going to be very helpful for anyone that's in Michigan, but those are going to help you determine what coverages you really should be looking at and what levels of coverages you need. The third mistake a lot of homeowners buy is they don't look at the deductibles. When your agent is doing the insurance policy for you, they're not always looking at what's the best for the clients. That's something I've personally found with a ton of agents out there. When I look at a policy, the first thing I go to is what deductible did they give them? Because the common that you'll normally see is a $1,000 deductible. Now be careful because there's two deductibles and not everybody is aware. You've got your standard deductible, which is called an all perils deductible, and then you've got your wind and hail deductible. Technically, it's the roof, right? The wind is going to knock the roof off. The hail is going to damage the roof or the siding, essentially the outside of the home. Those are where your major claims come from. And what a lot of agents do if they're not competitive is they'll do the $1,000 on all perils to make it look nice, but then over here in this subcategory, they're going to do a 2% wind and hail deductible. Well, 2% of your house, if it's a $400,000 house, is going to be $8,000. If your roof is $12,000 to repair, you pay $8,000, they pay $4,000. Not really a good deal for the homeowner. Why have the insurance if you're not going to actually be able to use it if you need it? So be very careful on the deductible you choose. If it is for the loan process and they need you to have a certain income to debt ratio, that's where the insurance can actually help. Having a larger deductible does lower that ratio, so you may actually be able to get a better deal through your mortgage broker. Once again, that's why having an agent that works directly with the mortgage broker helps you get the best rate, but also get the best insurance with the better deductible. The fourth one is actually not as common, but it's knowing when you need to have flood insurance. If you're in a flood zone, or if you're possible in a flood zone, you may want to debate that, because flood is just not covered. If water comes into the foundation, water comes up from the ground, that's not a typical coverage that any policy generally has. That's when the flood insurance is going to kick in. It's actually not that expensive, but it can be. It depends on what you want covered. Because a flood policy is optional, you can pick anything you want. Some people have to have it for the loan, but then you have a lot of choices. You don't necessarily have to cover the contents because they're more worried about the house. So if it's something that you have to do and you don't care, then that's an option. Just exclude all the contents, your personal belongings, and if there's a flood, you're just out. But if you want the right fit and knowing those coverages, that's where we say, do you have enough to be covered? Is being in a flood zone, you may want to make sure that your agent is giving you also personal property outside of your home insurance, because it's not typically covered. But Mark, I thought water was covered. Well, it kind of is. It's not in what we mentioned. Water coming in from the foundation, water coming in from leaking windows, things like that. There are water backup coverages, and there is also sump pump coverage. So if a sump pump failed and water came in from the ground, then that's a different scenario. That's because the actual device that was meant to get it out of the house, the overflow, it failed, and that's a covered incident. It's sudden and incidental. If a pipe burst, same scenario, you've got that coverage where if that happens, then you've got coverage for that sudden and incidental problem. We do get very detailed in that Home 101, which I'll link at the end. The fifth common mistake when you're purchasing home insurance is the trustworthiness of the agent that you're working with. There are a lot of good connections out there, and that's one thing that we constantly as agents do, is we try to work with mortgage brokers and realtors and say, hey, if you need insurance, come to us. And sometimes they don't realize that the agent that they're sending them to doesn't know what they're doing. There's a lot of new agents out there, and that's fine. You need to learn. It's a process. It takes several years to get to this level to where you understand what each policy is and where the premium sits. Depending on the customer, what's the best fit? What's the best scenario? Not giving the coverage options to customers, I personally think, is one of those faults that a lot of agents, they focus just strictly on how much the policy will be. How cheap can I get it? That should be the secondary thought. Focus on coverage, the right scenario, your profile, your fit, and where your possibilities could be. If you have a major claim, can you afford that deductible? Can you pay these things? Now that we've got all of that packaged, let's take a look at what prices are out there. We're independent, so we can shop multiple different companies, and that's where that big, huge benefit for your independent agents are. Yes, it's great to have one guy that can help you, but can he check prices across the board? That's the availability of having that independent agent, but also you gotta make sure that they're legit. They're not willing to scam the system. If they're willing to bend the rules for you, what's to tell them to protect themselves to say, no, I didn't say that, that's on you? It's a little scary. It's one of those things where the agents will always be needed for that reason, and it's also one of those reasons that a lot of people don't trust agents. Working with a trustworthy agent makes a huge difference. Not always the cheapest price, but always the best scenario if you have a claim. So how do I find out what is a good agent? Well, the easiest way is Google. Google reviews are super powerful, and they tell you the scenarios that people have had. If you have less than a 4-star review, then I would consider debating whether they're worth working with. We have 5 stars, and we may eventually get a 1 because of some reason, right? But that won't knock us down below the 4-star. Read through the comments, understand the scenarios. It's not always the agent's fault if something happens, but if they're not willing to take responsibility and assess the situation, that's not necessarily the agent that I personally want to work with. The sixth common mistake that you have with insurance companies and agents and purchasing a home and all of the things, is not disclosing things to the insurance agency. What do I mean by things? So if you have maintenance issues, if you have problems with the house, they're going to send an inspector out probably 7 out of 10 times. There's a good chance that if you try to hide something, it's going to show up. Let's use an example of you knew that there was a leak somewhere And if that leak turns into a larger issue, if after they inspect the claim, they may deny it altogether because it was a known issue. If you don't disclose some of the issues that you have, you might be just wasting your time. I have had a few times where I've insured somebody. I've gotten some decent photos from them because we typically like to see what the house looks like before we insure it, and everything looked good. An inspector goes out and says X, Y, and Z, we can't insure this house. So now you've wasted about a month of your time because they will give you a couple weeks to fix it, or at least a time frame, and you have those options. You can either fix the problem or you can move to a different insurance company, and now you're starting that whole cycle over. Most insurance companies have similar guidelines and similar restrictions. So if you have one issue with one company, odds are you're going to have that issue with most of the companies. That's another benefit to having your agent, is that they will work on your behalf. I recently just had a client where the issues that they had put them into cancellation, and after reviewing it, it didn't make sense. Like, most of the things were just cosmetic. We called up an underwriter, discussed it, debated it, and now we're in a really good situation. The cancellation is going away, and we just have to cut some tree limbs and wash off some mold that was growing on some siding. Pretty simple, easy to fix, but if you're in Michigan, it's winter at the timing of this video, so we've extended the time frame that we have to get those maintenance repairs done. The seventh mistake that a lot of people make when purchasing a home and getting home insurance is not shopping around. If you have an agent that you work with, I 100% think that's the route you should go. Go with the trusted advisor. If it's a family friend, whatever the case is, if they can get within your budget, you're not going to have anyone that you can trust more. Those of you that are shopping and you're already working with someone, by all means, they're a great fit. But like we mentioned earlier, if you don't have that scenario, or you're working with someone and they're new, if they can't shop the policy around to multiple companies, or you don't necessarily just fully trust them, then it's going to make sense to do some research. Find out what companies you should work with. For us in Michigan, there's probably thousands of agents that do insurance like we do. Whether they're knowledgeable or not, it's up to them, right? Their training process. If you get any inclination that the company or the agent that you're working with isn't putting your best interest first, then it does make sense to shop around. Now, price-wise, it also is a very big benefit because housing prices are taking a big hit, especially this year. My policy went up about 10%. It's not necessarily that the price went up, it's the replacement cost of my house that went up. So having an agent that understands that part, not necessarily just saying, well, let's try to get it cheaper, let's find out, one, why it went up, what's the cost difference, and why there's a price difference. I'm not necessarily going to switch my policy because I like the company I'm with, I got the coverages that I want, and I'm willing to pay a little extra because the replacement cost of my house, instead of being $200, is now $250. So there's actually a value to me paying a little bit more. That way, if I have a claim, I'm actually insured correctly. My 3-bedroom house is not going to turn into a 2-bedroom house because I didn't have enough to rebuild it. The 8th common mistake, and I am a culprit of this as well, so this is very common for everybody, and this is more of a long-term mistake that people make, is not updating your insurance agent or your company of changes that you've made. If you've added a 3-season porch, if you added a pool in the back, if you've added fencing, if you've added anything that could possibly put you over the coverage that you need, if you're the type that wants to have the coverage and be insured correctly, you should always let your agent know about any changes that you've made to the home. For me, I've always worried about that because it was like super secretive. I don't want to tell the government that I improved my house by $100,000 and now I got to pay extra taxes. Insurances don't tie to the government that way. So if you change the insurance to cover it correctly, you won't necessarily be notifying anybody of anything except for fixing the policy that you have. That's more for the person that wants to 100% make sure that they're covered. I get it. I fall in that same boat too, where I'm like, okay, I just did all these things. If I lose out, I lose out, and so on and so forth. The longer I do it, the more I realize, like, as I make major changes to the home, that it does make sense to insure it properly. The 9th mistake that a lot of people make when purchasing home insurance is understanding that major disasters aren't usually covered. You would assume if a hurricane came through, if an earthquake happened, that you're good, you've got insurance. Those are separate pieces, and that's where reading your policy is very daunting, but also beneficial to know that your typical major disasters aren't necessarily going to cover your home. Yes, you can add water backup coverage to cover scenarios like that, and you can add mold and fungi, and depending on the company, and there's all of these coverages you can endorse, but those are additional pieces. Having the right amount of jewelry, having those types of coverages are just additional benefits that you can add if you have those extra pieces. If there's an earthquake, insurance just doesn't cover that in almost every state. Now, the states that have common earthquakes, now we're kind of going outside of Michigan, you can purchase an earthquake policy. So you can add or endorse that onto your policy so it does cover that scenario. If there's a hurricane, we seldom see that. If it's more wind damage, then that's one thing. But if there's actual disaster, hurricane comes through and rips the house out, you may want to check to see if you're covered in that scenario. Most of them, you're not. And the 10th mistake that a lot of people make when purchasing home insurance is not reading your coverages correctly. So there's really 5 things or 6 pieces that you really should focus on. And there's a lot more, like I said, we'll link that video here in a second. But the main things that you want to focus on is coverage A, B, C, D, E, and F. That's coverage A, your dwelling, the house. Coverage B, your other structures, fence, shed, and the other coverages, which is going to be your liability. So if somebody were to sue you, how much you're covered for. Med pay, if somebody got injured on your property. That way you don't have to get sued. You can just have some medical in case that scenario comes up. And then your personal belongings. There's also some living expenses, is if something happened, you got to move out of the house while it's being rebuilt and fixed. There's a lot of different coverages that are available. Those are the main pieces that you should focus on. And don't forget to look at the deductible to make sure it fits what you are comfortable paying out. Personally, I have a little bit larger of a deductible because if I have a major claim, then I'm willing to pay that extra. If I don't have a major claim, I'm willing to just fix the problem. I want to self-insure, so to speak, where I'll go out and fix the shingles on my roof, or I'll go out and fix the siding or pay someone myself. It's just kind of that home ownership piece. Hopefully this was helpful. If you guys got value out of it, give me the thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to follow more. If you're looking for an agent or a broker, definitely fill out the description below. I'm Mark with Valor Insurance. I'll see you soon.